Her son locked her in a storage unit with a fake death certificate and her own pension paying the rent. Irene Mallory, widow, former legal assistant, didn't panic. Brian thought she'd disappear quietly. Just another fragile woman relocated out of the way. By Friday, his assets were frozen, his trust revoked, and his name flagged by the DOJ. She'd been erased on paper, so she weaponized the ink. And when he finally knocked on her door, the only thing waiting for him was the audit. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor, subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. Irene's eyes snapped open into darkness. The air was dry and metallic, tinged with the scent of old paint and dust. Something hummed faintly above her, a fluorescent ceiling light flickering like it was unsure whether to stay on or give up altogether. She shifted slowly, and her hip cried out against the hard edge of a narrow cot. Her suitcase sat upright at the foot, zipped shut like a dog waiting for a command. There were no windows, no clock, no sense of time. She sat up, disoriented, the thin blanket falling to her lap. Her hand reached instinctively for the side table that wasn't there. No phone, no purse, no watch, just a wire shelf bolted to the steel wall. And on that shelf, a sticky note, slanted and slightly curled. Black marker, block letters. Irene, relocation. Her stomach went hollow. Irene Mallory had been many things: paralegal, mother, wife, and more recently, a grandmother with stiff knees and a sharper-than-ever sense of when something was wrong. This was wrong. It was wrong in that deep, bone-level way that told you danger had already passed you once and might be circling back for another go. She stood, slowly. The metal latch on the inside of the unit door clicked as she tested it. Unlocked. She hesitated. Then, with a breath, she rolled the door upward. The corridor outside was long, narrow, and painfully cold. Rows of identical storage units stretched down both sides, doors shut tight. A single fluorescent tube buzzed overhead, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. The silence was complete, until a dull thud echoed from somewhere far down the hall, then faded like it had changed its mind. She stepped out barefoot onto the cold concrete, suitcase rolling behind her. She remembered the van, Brian's voice chirping about short-term construction, and your comfort is our priority, Mom. The way Kelly had smiled too brightly, the lemon-scented disinfectant in the back of the moving truck. And Molly, poor Molly, standing beside a box marked kitchen, fragile, her eyes darting between her phone and her grandmother. I promise it's just for a few days, Irene, Brian had said. They're renovating the place, something about asbestos or mold, can't remember which. She'd nodded, not because she believed him, but because resistance felt performative at that point. The way a child might push against a seatbelt just to feel it tighten. The decision had already been made for her. Now, standing in the sterile stillness of the storage corridor, it hit her she wasn't meant to leave that unit. Not right away, maybe not ever. She turned a corner, following the faint whirring of a ventilation fan until the corridor widened near a loading dock. A vending machine buzzed idly beside a narrow hallway. Through a dusty plexiglass panel in the door ahead, she spotted someone, an older man in a red vest, pushing a dolly stacked with boxes. Irene knocked once. The man paused, looked up, and frowned through the glass. He unlocked the door, cracking it open. "Ma'am," he said cautiously, "you can't be back here. This area's restricted." "I was in Unit C-17, she said, her voice raspier than she remembered. "I didn't mean to be. There's been some mistake." The man blinked. His eyes traveled from her suitcase to her face. Recognition sparked. "Oh hell, you're the woman from that family video. The one with the slideshow." She stared at him. "What slideshow?" He scratched his head. "You know, the memorial. They played it during that big event in the parking lot last week. It had like music and everything. I will remember you, that kind of stuff." Her lips parted, but no words came. Cold rushed up her spine. The man suddenly shifted, apologetic. "I didn't mean any disrespect, ma'am. Just everybody said you passed. It was, I dunno, kind of a whole thing." Irene gripped the handle of her suitcase tighter. "Do you have today's paper?" she asked quietly. He glanced behind him. I think there's one in the break room. As he turned, Irene looked down at her palm. Her fingers were still trembling. She wasn't missing. She wasn't dead. She had been relocated. The man returned with a copy of the Sacramento Bee, folded to the classifieds. Sorry, no front section. Someone took it. She took it anyway. Just then, a phone rang in the distance. A high, sharp tone. Not hers, not nearby. But the sound cut through her like a scalpel. She looked up toward the rows of units. Somewhere out there, someone had a phone. And maybe, just maybe, that someone thought she was still locked away. She wasn't. And now she was moving. The librarian eyed her warily, but said nothing. Irene had become an expert in slipping beneath suspicion. Gray cardigan, low voice, polite smile. She could still turn invisible when she needed to. Age helped with that. So did being presumed dead. She sat at the corner guest terminal, furthest from the main desk, and let the screen flicker to life. The keyboard felt sticky under her fingertips. She cracked her knuckles once and began typing. Irene Mallory, Sacramento. Obituary. Probate. The third link hit like a slap. Estate of Mallory, Irene A. Status, deceased. Executor. Brian Mallory filing. 10 days ago, property. Pending sale, MLS ref #882411. She stared at the screen, lips pressed into a thin white line. They hadn't just locked her away. They buried her on paper. Legally. Efficiently. A pop-up blinked at her to accept the terms of computer use. She clicked agree with the calm of someone whose fuse had already burned down to the core. Then she opened her email, the backup account no one knew existed except one person. To G. Clark Legal at Proton Mail. Com subject, need eyes and teeth body. Find me, find the case. Urgent. She hit send. The cursor blinked back at her. The screen felt too bright. Her hands trembled slightly. Anger, not fear. Next, she opened a private search tab and checked the MLS listing. Her house. Photographed. Staged. Listed as is. Closing window, 14 days. Her eyes flicked over the photos. Someone had moved the needlepoint off the wall. Her rocking chair was gone. A vase she hated had been centered on the dining room table, full of fake calla lilies. The caption read, "Charming fixer with legacy potential." Legacy, her ass. She leaned back, hands in her lap, teeth grinding quietly. Brian had moved fast. Too fast. Probate shouldn't have cleared that easy. Not with the kind of retirement portfolio she had, split across joint ownerships, trust funds, contingent clauses. Unless he'd known exactly how to maneuver the filing, or who to pay off. The idea felt less like suspicion and more like certainty. Brian had always been good at two things: finding loopholes and pretending they were favors. Her phone was still gone, but tucked inside her suitcase was a battered leather wallet with a single item of real power: her emergency card. It wasn't even in her name. It was attached to a legacy account from her courthouse days, issued through Martin Price's Quiet Connections. He'd insisted once, after a particularly vicious divorce settlement they'd handled together. Always keep something outside the family vault. She walked 6 blocks to the motel she used to joke about when passing it on I Street. Only slightly haunted. The lobby reeked of pine-scented cleaner and stale vending machine popcorn. The clerk didn't ask for much, just an ID number, and the card slid through without a hiccup. Room 204 was small, smelled like detergent and old air. She bolted the door behind her, checked under the bed, not out of paranoia, just habit, and opened her suitcase on the creaky desk. Inside was the backup phone, flip, prepaid, slightly outdated, but reliable. She powered it on. There were no missed calls, no messages. Not yet. She pressed and held speed dial 7. The ringtone played half a bar of Ode to Joy before a voice answered. "Irene, I thought you were dead." "I was," she said, "but now I'm billing hours again." Martin Price exhaled. "Where are you?" "I'll let you know when I know who's watching." She gave him the barest rundown. Not the unit, not the motel, just enough to activate the instincts he'd honed years ago before leaving law for something blurrier. He whistled low when she mentioned the probate. I'll pull the full filing, he said. Meet tomorrow? She hesitated. Somewhere no one remembers us. Capitol Roasters, back patio. Noon. She hung up. No goodbye, they didn't need one. Outside, the sunset was throwing bruised light across the sky, burnt orange, deep plum, blood rust. Irene closed the blinds and set the flip phone on the nightstand. Then she took out the file folder from her suitcase. Not much inside, just a few original documents, her marriage license, an old health directive. But enough. She smoothed the creases in her cardigan and turned on the TV to mask her presence. Behind her, the email pinged. Re-need eyes and teeth. Genevieve's reply was brief. Already in motion. Lock the exits. The wolves are fat. Irene smiled for the first time that day. Then the room phone rang. She hadn't given anyone the number. The county clerk's office hadn't changed in 30 years. Still smelled like toner and burnt coffee. Still lined with sad potted plants trying to die unnoticed. Irene slipped through the glass doors just after opening. A scarf wrapped around her head, prescription sunglasses large enough to mask the heavy bags under her eyes. No one looked at her twice. The invisibility of the elderly, she thought, was both curse and camouflage. She approached the kiosk, typed in a request for vital records, certified copies, and waited for her number to appear. Her reflection in the plexiglass barrier caught her off guard. Pale lips, thinning hair, a defiance in the jawline that hadn't aged a minute. Number 14. A tinny voice called from window B. The woman behind the glass wore cat-eye readers and an expression of chronic underpayment. Irene slid a request form under the slot. Birth certificate and SSN verification. Please, she said. Originals certified. Request for your own? The clerk asked without looking up. Yes, ma'am. Valid ID. Irene pulled out the worn courthouse ID, faded but intact. The clerk gave it a glance, then a second, longer look. Something flickered in her eyes. Recognition? Doubt? I need to clear this, she said, standing. Wait here. Irene didn't breathe until the woman returned 3 minutes later, document sleeves in hand. Verification will post to the state system within 72 hours, the clerk said, sliding the birth certificate forward. Do you need to file anything else? Irene nodded. Affidavit of mistaken death. The woman blinked. Excuse me, I need Form 2183, identity theft and death certificate error. She said it gently, like someone reminding a neighbor that it wasn't Halloween just yet. The clerk hesitated, then turned to her drawer. As she filled it out, Irene chose every word like a knife. No drama, no exaggeration. Just the facts. Date, time, improper filing, misrepresented status, executor conflict. She didn't need to prove innocence. She just needed to make the right kind of noise on record and quietly. By the time she stepped out into the morning sun, the wind had picked up. Her scarf fluttered like a flag. A gray Subaru pulled up along the curb. Genevieve was driving, sunglasses on, no makeup, hair tied back into a severe bun that said she meant business. She reached across the passenger seat, popped the door open without a word. Irene slid in and closed it. You're not just back, Genevieve said, pulling into traffic. You're watching now. They drove in silence until they reached a quiet cul-de-sac lined with parked cars and trimmed hedges. A retired notary named Floyd lived here, Genevieve's cousin, who let them use his detached garage for paperwork and bourbon. Inside it was cool and windowless. Irene sat at the fold-out table, watching Genevieve open the laptop and slide over a cheap prepaid phone. New number. Encrypted. I loaded a few tools, secure search, dummy emails, and a property lookup scraper, Genevieve said. Let's see how greedy your boy got. They worked in tandem, falling into rhythm like they'd never stopped. Within the hour, they had an outline. Brian had leased 2 new BMWs under a shell company named Rogue Caliber Partners LLC. Kelly had expanded her boutique with a suspicious cash injection during a supposed downturn. And most interestingly, a trust fund in the name of Mallory Futures had been opened, seeded with over $180,000, just days after Irene's death was filed. Arrogant little rat, Genevieve muttered. He's too fast. No cleanup. He thinks you're ashes. He'll wish I was. Irene opened a blank document and typed the name carefully. Second Feather Holdings, LLC. The phrase came from her late husband, who once told her that surviving your first betrayal gives you wings, but it's the second one that teaches you how to fly without mercy. Using her emergency accounts, she registered it through a remote agent service in Nevada. Fully legal, fully untraceable. She linked it to a set of accounts she hadn't touched in years, old investments from her paralegal days. Quiet things, small, careful nest eggs. Then she began the transfer. Each one felt like reclaiming a breath she didn't know she'd lost. By sundown, the entity had legs, bank accounts, a virtual mailing address, tax ID. Irene leaned back, stretching her spine. I'm not just coming for my house, she said softly. I'm coming for every dollar they turned into champagne. Genevieve nodded. You'll need to move soon. I can cover 2 more nights here max. After that, we draw heat. I know. Irene closed the laptop. Outside, a dog barked once, then went silent. She looked at her new phone. No messages, no calls, until it buzzed in her hand. A name popped up on the screen. Molly. One word followed. Where are you? Genevieve slid the envelope across the cafe table with 2 fingers, as if handling something infectious. Open it slowly, she said. Unless you've eaten. His hudderupper. Wadham had Redshi. Irene peeled back the flap. Inside were glossy 5 and R7 prints, cheaply developed, like someone wanted the evidence to feel more celebratory than legal. She didn't have to ask where they came from. Genevieve always had at least 3 lines into Sacramento's event industry. The first photo showed Kelly standing beside a giant white floral wreath, microphone in hand, fake pearls gleaming. Her makeup was immaculate. The backdrop read, Celebrating a Life, Irene Mallory, 1949-2025. Irene studied the faces in the background. Real estate colleagues, boutique regulars, strangers, all sipping champagne under a rented tent in someone's backyard. A banner floated overhead, hosted by the Mallory family with gratitude to all who cared. She flipped to the next photo. Kelly again, this time laughing, holding a glass, mid-toast. Another catered platters, wine from a local sponsor, string quartet off to one side. A caption scribbled on the back in Genevieve's handwriting read, Cost estimate $12, covered by Irene's grief fund. Irene let the photos fall to the table. Do you think she practiced the tears? She asked. She didn't have to, Genevieve said. Narcissists don't need rehearsals. They just need a spotlight. Irene sipped her coffee and didn't reply. That afternoon, she bought a ticket to the Capitol Hill Foundation's Winter Gala. The seat wasn't cheap, but thanks to her LLC's shadow card, it wouldn't trace back to her. The ticket confirmation came with a tagline, honoring local caregivers who go above and beyond. Kelly Mallory was the keynote honoree. Irene dressed carefully the night of the gala, gray lace gloves, a platinum wig trimmed short tortoiseshell glasses. Her late sister's vintage coat added just enough bourgeois charm to make her forgettable among the other socialites. The banquet hall was warm and fragrant with roses. Waiters glided between tables like synchronized swimmers. Irene kept her head down, choosing a seat near the back with a partial view of the stage. When the lights dimmed and the applause started, she raised her champagne flute, not in toast, but as camouflage. Kelly walked on stage to a standing ovation. Her speech opened with forced vulnerability and a perfectly timed pause. We weren't ready to lose her, she said, eyes gleaming. But caring for Irene in her final months reminded me that love is an action, not a place. Laughter, sniffling. One woman even dabbed her eyes. Irene pressed her nails into her palm, watching the room tilt in her daughter-in-law's favor, like a court already bought and sold. But then her eyes drifted. Near the front, Molly sat next to Brian, chin tilted downward, thumbs clutched in her lap. Then, slowly Molly looked back, their eyes locked. Not a flicker of shock. No gasp, just the faintest exhale and a downward glance. She knew, she had always known. Molly lowered her eyes, and Irene felt something tighten, grief, maybe, but also resolve. This was never going to be just a battle for money. It was a battle for memory, for narrative, for truth. The next morning, Irene met Clay Ramirez outside a shuttered dental office. He'd always preferred neutral ground, places with no cameras, no associate. Just him, a legal pad, and a thermos of coffee he never offered to share. Clay was in his early 50s now, with shoulders like stone and a voice made for deposition. "You're sure you want to proceed?" he asked, flipping through the manila folder she handed him. "My house is pending sale," she said, with my name scrubbed off the record. "That's not probate, it's theft." He nodded slowly. "I can petition for a freeze based on falsified executor action." Quietly. "Might delay the sale, buy you time." She handed him the final page. A signed declaration. Ink still damp. "I need more than time, Clay. I need tea." He tucked the folder into his briefcase. "I'll file by end of day. You'll know when the wires lock up." They stood in silence for a moment, just the wind pushing leaves across the sidewalk. Irene reached into her coat and handed him a flash drive. "This is everything we've pulled so far: LLCs, asset movement, boutique inflation, forged timelines." Clay's brow lifted, impressed. "You've done your homework." "I never stopped." He tipped an imaginary hat. "Then it's my turn." As he walked away, Irene looked down at her phone. A new message from an unknown number. "Unit 51B, pickup scheduled. Inventory must be cleared by Friday." She stared at it. She'd never heard of Unit 51B, but she knew exactly who rented it. The motel room clock blinked 2:59 p.m., a cheap red digital glow bouncing off the water stain. Irene held her burner phone like a detonator. At exactly 3 p.m., she hit send. 2 simultaneous instructions routed through Second Feather Holdings. Account A closed. Assets liquidated. Account B redirected to dormant vault reserve under her name. Both had been dormant accounts, survivor beneficiary structures, she'd quietly opened in 2013 during Brian's first bankruptcy scare. He'd never asked how she stayed afloat while his life capsized. She never offered. Now they were his foundation, and she'd just knocked out the basement. She leaned back in the vinyl chair, listening to the soft hum of nothing. Across town, in a glass-walled conference room, Brian Mallory sat with his mortgage officer, expecting a routine refinance on the Crestwood property. He was mid-laugh, coffee in hand, when the man across the table paled and said, "Your collateral's just disappeared." "It's not validating." Brian's smile died. "What do you mean disappeared? Your listed holdings are no longer in your... I need to call compliance." By 3:07 p.m., he was pacing outside the building, red-faced and calling 5 numbers in a row, none of which picked up. By 4:15 p.m., Kelly Mallory was standing in her boutique office, clutching a past due notice in one hand and her iPad in the other. She reread the email twice. Notice of lease termination, non-payment. Effective immediately. Property management confirms escrow trust access frozen. She let out a sharp laugh, like a tea kettle about to boil over. "We had 30 days, she snapped into the phone. "You said the trust was locked but safe." "I said pending audit." Brian hissed back. It was supposed to be a pause, not a shutdown. Kelly stared at her boutique calendar. 5 clients, 2 influencers scheduled for fittings, a photographer in the morning, all built on a lease now collapsing under her stilettos. That night, the boutique lights stayed off. The next morning, Irene found the envelope in her motel mailbox. No return address, handwritten in block letters. For Irene. Inside 6 printed credit card statements, all tied to a burner account in Kelly's maiden name, Sabrina DeWitt. Each showed charges to obscure consultants, luxury courier service, and a 2-week stay at a vineyard resort. The same week Irene had been relocated. She flipped to the final page. The last transaction, $4,800. Audio-visual memorial services, Mallory celebration of life. Irene pressed her hand to her mouth and let the silence have her for a moment. She wasn't sure what stung more, the brazen theft or the theatricality of it. They'd eulogized her with her own money. That afternoon, Martin called from a payphone outside an auto parts store, where no one would think to. "You'll want to," he said, "sending now." Seconds later, a video hit her inbox. In it, Brian was red-faced, arms slicing through the air in front of a sleek suited attorney outside the title office. "You guaranteed me," Brian barked. She was supposed to stay down. This whole deal was airtight, unless she crawled out of the FUP. Irene watched twice. Then she closed her laptop and opened a secure portal to the California Department of Consumer and Business Affairs. She knew exactly which tab to click. Report housing fraud. Anonymous whistleblower submission under details. She listed 3 addresses Brian had flipped in the last year using undisclosed family trusts and identity-shielded financing. Each one traced back to someone presumed mentally incompetent, or, in her case, dead. She uploaded screenshots, shell company connections, paper trails Genevieve had mapped by hand. When she hit submit, the form disappeared into a cloud of digital silence. Then came the automated response. Thank you for your report. A case agent will review submissions within 5 business days. Urgent filings may receive accelerated scrutiny. She didn't need them to move fast. She just needed them to move. Irene leaned back and let the breath out of her lungs. Across the room, her motel television played an old western. A man stood alone on a dusty street, waiting for someone to draw first. Her burner phone buzzed once. Another message. This one from an encrypted thread Genevieve set up. Incoming audit freeze, successful. Brian's team is calling it a ghost event. Irene stared at the phrase. She grinned. Small, sharp. Then she opened her planner and circled a date in red. Friday, Unit 51B. She had something to deliver. Or maybe, remove. The neighborhood looked the same on the outside. Manicured hedges, HOA-compliant mulch, a child's forgotten scooter resting against the curb. But Irene could feel it before she stepped from the rideshare car. Something was off. Her home no longer carried the hum of memory. It was dressed up in falseness, like a mannequin in her clothes. She adjusted the canvas tote over her shoulder and walked up the driveway slowly, nodding at the man on the porch with a clipboard. His polo bore the logo of a local estate cleanout service. He barely looked at her. I'm here to pick up the heirlooms, Irene said, handing him the forged donation form Clay's office had drafted overnight. Said I'd be by today. The man glanced at the paper, then shrugged and waved her in. They're clearing the back rooms. Whatever you were told is probably boxed up already. Inside, the air was too cold. Overconditioned. She stepped over flattened cardboard, past the entry mirror that no longer had her reflection memorized. There were footprints on the tile from muddy work boots. A moving crew moved like ghosts, indifferent, efficient, breaking decades down into labeled crates. And there, near the hallway, she saw it her dresser. The one with hand-turned brass handles, refinished in '82, after her husband dropped a coffee pot on it during tax season. It stood awkwardly near the front door, halfway wrapped in plastic, with a neon sticker slapped on the side, bedroom 1, to move. Her mouth went dry. That dresser held a hidden panel. And in that panel, her marriage certificate. The original trust papers. And the only key to the downtown bank where the real titles lived, sleeping quietly in a safe deposit box no one had mentioned in any of Brian's filings. She took a breath, stepped toward a woman sorting throw pillows into a bin. Excuse me, could I have one last moment in the room where I used to sleep? I promised the church I'd go through personal items. Didn't get a chance. The woman blinked, then shrugged. Don't take too long. They want to finish the load today. Irene walked slowly down the hall, each step echoing louder than it should have. When she opened the door to the bedroom, the scent of dust and lavender fought for dominance. Nothing was the same. Wrong bedspread, wrong lamps, no books on the shelves. But the bones were hers. The structure remembered her, even if no one else did. On the nightstand sat 2 manila folders, one open, pages spilling slightly. Red tabs jutted from the corners, labeled in Brian's shorthand, IRA, Irene, beneficiary adjustment pending. Contingency clause, invalid. She didn't blink. From her sleeve she slipped a slim penknife Genevieve had sharpened herself. It clicked softly into place. Irene knelt by the dresser, careful not to disturb the plastic wrap, and felt beneath the top drawer for the groove her fingers knew by muscle memory. The latch gave on the second try. Inside, tucked in a worn ivory envelope, were the originals, the marriage license embossed with her name, and the key, cool and heavy, tied with the red thread her husband had once joked would keep it from slipping into the wrong hand. She slipped the envelope under the lining of her coat, securing it with 2 safety pins she'd sewn into the hem the night before. Quiet preparation had always been her superpower. She stood, wiped the floor beneath her knees, and took 2 quick photos of the files on the nightstand, close-ups of the headers, Brian's handwriting, the asset reference. A voice called from the hallway, "Ma'am, we'll need to lock that room up now." Irene turned. "Coming," she called, voice steady. As she walked back toward the front, a mover held the door open for her. She gave him a polite smile and nodded toward the dresser. Take care with that, it's older than you think. Outside, the air had shifted. A breeze curled through the maple trees like an omen. She reached the sidewalk just as her phone buzzed in her coat pocket. A text from Martin, just 4 words. They know you moved. The courthouse lot was still damp from the night's drizzle, and dawn had barely cracked open its gray lid over Sacramento. Irene sat in Clay's Honda Civic, watching steam coil off the windshield. Neither of them spoke. Their coffees steamed in tandem, his black, hers forgotten. In the back seat sat the manila envelope Irene had retrieved from her dresser drawer. Inside it, the key, and the last thread left from a marriage full of quietly kept promises. Clay finally spoke. This'll jam the gears. Once it's filed, everything Brian touched with that POA stops cold. Sales, transfers, restructures frozen, might even trigger a review on his license. Good, Irene said, sharp as a tack. It's time the engine ceased. They entered through the side staff door, thanks to Clay's credentials. A sleepy clerk behind glass accepted the complaint packet without much interest until she scanned the barcode on the affidavit of forgery. Her eyes lifted. This is serious, she murmured. Clay nodded once. Filed under Section 13006. Fraudulent misuse of power of attorney with direct harm to a protected estate. The clerk swallowed. I'll mark it expedited. Behind the glass, a red stamp thudded onto the top sheet. Irene watched it bleed into the paper like a warning flare. 2 hours later, Irene stepped through the vault entrance at First Security downtown. The marble walls were the same as they'd been when she and her husband opened the box in '91, though the clerk at the front desk was too young to know what a war bond even looked like. She showed ID, signed in under her original name, and followed the manager through the vault corridor. Key in hand, gloves on, the lock clicked after only one turn. She slid the drawer free and laid it open on the table. A yellowed folder, 4 envelopes, 1 ring box. A bundle of war bonds bound with a paper clip, and beneath them all, deed titles, 4 properties, one of them bearing her maiden name and her husband's, co-owners with right of survivorship. She let out a quiet breath. No signature from Brian anywhere. No amendments. The original trust stood intact. Her gloved fingers found the thickest envelope, her husband's cursive scrawled across the front. In the event of dishonor, she opened it. Inside, a letter, a long one. Irene, if you're reading this, it means our boy went and did something I warned him never to. I told him more than once, this house doesn't pass by pressure. It passes by trust. And if he ever came to you with pens and papers, trying to make things simpler, I said no, and I meant it. I hope you remember that. I hope you make him. Her throat tightened. She folded the letter slowly and slipped it into her coat. She walked out of that vault 10 pounds lighter and 20 years older. They met in the greenhouse behind Genevieve's duplex. Rain pattered lightly against the plastic panels. Molly stood waiting, her eyes rimmed red, coat too thin. Irene didn't approach like a grandmother. She approached like someone waiting for the truth. Molly looked down first. They told me you wanted it, the downsizing, that you picked the unit, said you didn't want to be a burden anymore. Her voice cracked like something rusted from silence. I didn't believe them, but I didn't ask either. Irene nodded, quiet. I watched them carry your boxes like luggage. Molly said, like they were checking you into a flight you didn't book. Irene reached into her bag and pulled out a single folder. Here's what I've done, she said. These are asset transfers. Irrevocable trust, all in your name. Under second feather. Molly blinked. Why? Because you saw me, Irene said softly. And you didn't say anything. But you saw, that counts for something. Molly took the folder in both hands. Is this legal? More than they ever were. They stood for a long moment, surrounded by green stems and the low hum of early spring. Finally, Molly whispered, I think Dad's gonna lose it. No, Irene said. He's already lost it. He just hasn't seen the receipt yet. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A message from Genevieve. Kelly just found out. The boutique locks were changed. Then another. From Clay. Brian tried to sell the Crestwood property this morning. Title blocked. He's on hold. Indefinitely. Irene turned her face toward the greenhouse skylight, where the first beam of sun broke through like it had waited specifically for her. Then the wind shifted, and with it, a sudden crack from the far end of the house. Molly froze. Irene looked at the glass door, calm but alert. Stay here. Outside, footsteps moved through gravel. Someone had found her again. The footsteps never made it to the greenhouse. A neighbor's dog barked once, a car door slammed, then nothing. Whoever it was had either realized where they were or had been warned off. Either way, it reminded Irene that time wasn't her ally anymore. It was just a match burning toward the fuse. She moved quickly. By sunrise the next morning, Kelly and Brian were halfway through a midweek stay at a luxury resort in Sonoma, charged, of course, to Irene's dead name card, the one tied to the boutique's bereavement expenses. Irene had only learned about the charge after cross-referencing Kelly's burner statements with Molly's envelope drop. A 6-night stay. Room service, private cabana, couples massage. She pictured them reclining in matching robes, sipping wine on a porch built by someone else's stolen retirement. She made the call just after 9 a.m. to the resort's billing department, using a direct line supplied by Genevieve. This is an anonymous fraud report tied to a federal elder abuse case, Irene said, her voice crisp but unhurried. Card number ending in 2261. The guest names are Brian and Kelly Mallory. I'd recommend you check your authorization list before their next mimosa. Then she hung up. Genevieve did the rest. 43 minutes later, a live stream appeared on a burner social account under the name CareWatch 916. It showed Kelly standing in the resort lobby, makeup half done, arms crossed as two suited staff explained something she clearly didn't understand. Behind her, Brian was gesturing wildly, until a uniformed security guard stepped forward and asked them both to vacate. Genevieve's voice could be heard off-screen, dry and amused. You don't get to toast over graves without the bill catching up. The video hit 1,100 views in under an hour. Back in Sacramento, Irene sat at a folding desk inside the motel room, laptop open, documents fanned out like a card trick. Clay had walked her through the paperwork earlier that week, an anonymous real estate acquisition, purchased in full by Second Feather Holdings. Today it finalized. The storage facility on Jacinto Avenue, the one where she'd woken up disoriented without a phone or a name, was now hers. Technically the LLC. Her first act as owner was to send out bonuses to every employee who'd been working the day she checked in. Cleaners, clerks, even the college-age security guard who'd waved at her once during a midnight smoke break. Every single one got a $500 prepaid Visa card and a note, "You didn't ask questions. That helped me survive." Her second act? A hand-delivered notice to Unit 51B, Brian's little empire of untraceable side hustles. Drone parts, crypto mining gear, liquidation pallets from bankrupt estates. It was all housed under one roof until today. The eviction letter was clean and cold, lease revoked, inventory access suspended pending audit. Property now under new ownership. Clearance deadline 72 hours. No name, no signature, just a stamp from Second Feather Holdings and an attached inventory freeze tag. Let him sweat. That night, Irene sat beside Molly on the living room floor of Genevieve's duplex. Boxes surrounded them, filled with ledger books, spiral-bound planners, receipts, and notebooks dating back to the Reagan administration. Irene's handwriting filled every page. Neat, dated, itemized. I didn't think I'd ever have to explain these to anyone, Irene said quietly. Molly hooked a scanner up to her laptop, fingers nimble despite her exhaustion. You don't. You just need a backup. And maybe one day, a library. They worked in silence for a while. The only sounds were the soft beep of the scanner and the occasional sigh when a page refused to flatten. At one point, Molly looked up. You tracked every dollar? Every single one, Irene said. And now they'll have to track me. Later that night, Martin's email hit her inbox. The subject line, "Something's rattling." Inside two attachments. One was a diagram of Brian's email server traffic, routing patterns to a pair of dummy companies, Palisade West Consulting and NV Futures, LLC. The second was a list of the IP addresses tied to each, traced back to financial portals tied directly to her stolen accounts. He funneled your money through ghost shells and backdoor tax shelters, Martin wrote. One of them lists Kelly as co-owner under a fake maiden alias. IRS would have a field day with this. Irene closed her eyes for a moment, letting the adrenaline settle. Then she opened a fresh document on her encrypted drive and began drafting. Not to the housing board this time. Not to the clerk's office. This time she addressed it to the California Department of Justice. Before she could type the first word, her phone buzzed again. A message. No number. Just text. You bought the unit. Why? Irene's fingers hovered over the screen. Brian had just made contact. The courtroom was smaller than Irene remembered, but colder in a way that felt familiar. Institutional, indifferent. The kind of place that didn't care who you used to be, only who you could prove you were now. She sat at the plaintiff's table beside Clay, her hands folded in her lap, the sleeves of her blazer cuffed just enough to show she wasn't pretending to be weak. Not today. Across from her, Brian wore a navy suit too tight in the shoulders, his jaw locked like he was chewing on regret. Kelly sat behind him, sunglasses perched on her head indoors, her phone clutched like a lifeline she wasn't allowed to touch. The judge, a man in his 60s with tired eyes and an impeccable tie knot, flipped through the case brief. We're here to determine the validity of the estate's power of attorney, the disputed signature trail, and alleged financial misconduct related to Mrs. Irene Mallory. He looked up. And today we have a new witness. Molly stepped forward slowly, her boots too loud against the polished floor. She held a folder in both hands, hair pulled back, sleeves rolled. The bailiff swore her in, and for a second, the room went very still. Clay stood. Miss Mallory, would you please state your relationship to the petitioner? She's my grandmother, Molly said. Her voice was steady, but her throat worked twice between sentences. I'm here because I watched them move her out. A rustle of whispers broke out behind the gallery rail. Kelly stiffened in her seat. Brian didn't look at Molly, just stared at the table like he could rearrange the outcome through sheer denial. I was told we were just helping her transition, Molly continued, that she wanted to live closer to downtown, but nothing about it felt right. What did you see? I saw my father load her dresser, her kitchen boxes, and her medical folder into the back of a van with no seatbelts. I asked where she was going. He told me it was a retirement trial run, a modern senior solution. She paused, but I saw the address on the manifest. It was a storage facility. Unit 17C. Brian's chair creaked as he leaned forward, whispering something to his lawyer. Clay held up the folder. Your Honor, we are submitting into evidence. Exhibit 12, screenshots from the witness's phone. These include messages from Kelly Mallory, mocking the retirement unit, referring to it as, and I quote, Granny's minimalist upgrade. The judge raised an eyebrow. Miss Mallory, did you send these messages? Kelly swallowed but didn't respond. They were never meant, she began, but her lawyer touched her arm sharply. The judge turned to Brian. Your initial filing claimed your mother was medically unstable, that she voluntarily vacated her home, that she requested simplified estate handling. Do you have any signed statements to support that claim? Brian cleared his throat. It was verbal. She'd been declining. Confused, we were just trying to help. The judge glanced at Clay. You filed a supplemental declaration. Clay nodded and handed over a copy of the letter. Irene stood, slowly. If I may, she said. The judge gestured for her to proceed. She opened the letter, creased, yellowed, but unmistakably genuine, and began to read. If you're reading this, Irene, it means Brian betrayed you. I warned him. I told him this house, this legacy, it doesn't pass by pressure. It passes by trust. You always knew what that meant. Make sure he learns. Her voice didn't waver. She folded the letter back into its envelope and sat down. The room went dead silent. Even the judge exhaled slowly, as if expelling something heavy. After a moment, he turned to Brian. Well, he said, your father seems to have had a clearer understanding of legal ownership than you do. Brian looked down. His lips parted, then closed again. Kelly stood abruptly, her heels echoing like gunshots as she left the courtroom, one hand pressed to her chest like she couldn't breathe. The judge looked back at his docket. Motion to pause all family-held account access. Granted. Independent forensic audit ordered. And full financial authority of the estate returns to Mrs. Irene Mallory, effective immediately. A small, involuntary gasp came from the gallery. Molly's eyes brimmed. Clay exhaled. Brian looked stunned, hollow, and then the bailiff leaned in, whispering something into the judge's ear. He frowned. Mrs. Mallory, please remain. We've just received a sealed motion from the Office of the Attorney General. He slid the envelope open. And it appears the state's now involved. They found the window smashed when they returned. Glass like jagged confetti across the kitchen floor. Irene didn't speak. She just stepped carefully over the glittering pieces and looked straight down the hall. Genevieve reached the bedroom first. Molly's laptop's gone, she said flatly. Nothing else touched. Irene moved to the bed, where her travel bag was still zipped. The files were undisturbed. The notebooks still stacked. Even her burner phone rested where she'd left it, face down on the quilt. Someone knew what they were looking for. Irene said. Genevieve nodded. And what they didn't need. There was no panic, just an efficient sweep of the room, checking that the backups, burner drives, and paper trails were where they needed to be. I told Molly to encrypt everything. Irene muttered. Do you think Genevieve was already dialing? Clay picked up on the second ring. I got the backup last night, he confirmed. Encrypted zip, double-layered, no metadata. Molly was smarter than all of them combined. Irene exhaled. For the first time in 2 hours, her shoulders dropped an inch. We're moving, she said. This place is burnt. By evening, Irene had relocated to the small guest house behind Genevieve's duplex. 1 room, a kitchenette, and a sturdy deadbolt. It faced a small garden that hadn't bloomed since 2008. The paint peeled at the corners, but Irene liked it. There was no history here. No theft, no theater, just her, a lock, and time. Martin arrived just past dusk, smelling like wind and diner coffee. He tossed a file onto the table. Your son's audacity has finally matured into full-blown felony, he said. He tried to sell your house again. Only this time, he used an offshore proxy, registered in the Bahamas. Buyer was a holding group, fronted by a shell CEO, goes by Corwin Drell. Irene opened the folder. The paperwork was all there, fake identity verification, foreign wire routing, even a forged signature from someone claiming to be her health advocate. She closed it. We're locking it up, she said. With Clay, Martin nodded. We file for emergency conservatorship first thing tomorrow. That stops escrow, triggers a lien review, and puts a real judge between your son and any closing table. Genevieve passed her a pen. Then let's sign it tonight. The injunction filed at 9:02 a.m. By 9:35, the county record site showed property status, under conservatorship review. No transfers permitted. Brian would see it soon enough. Later that afternoon, Irene sat with Molly on the steps of the guest house, a fleece blanket wrapped around both their knees. Molly held a tablet in her lap, screen glowing in the golden hour. It's live, she said. It's called The Quiet Theft. First posts about you. Irene arched a brow. Is that wise? It's not about revenge, Molly said. It's about pattern recognition. I'm using real stories. Other people, other families, just enough to draw a map for someone else before it happens to them. Irene watched as her own words scrolled across the screen. An excerpt from a journal entry she'd written in 1989. They never steal from you all at once. First, it's your seat at the table, then it's your name on the account. Then it's your voice when someone asks a question, and you're not the one who gets to answer. Within 20 minutes, the post had 312 views, by sundown over 900. And by the time Irene poured her evening tea, she'd received 4 emails from readers asking how to recognize financial coercion in probate documents. She didn't answer right away. She was still watching the sky shift colors when Clay's email pinged her inbox. Subject line, something interesting just moved. She opened it. Inside a forwarded alert from the Department of State, Corwin Drell. Brian's offshore alias had just booked a one-way flight to Panama. Flight time 8:12 a.m. next morning. Clay's note underneath read, "Guess he just realized you're holding the pen now." Irene stared at the screen, then closed the laptop gently. She picked up her pen and began drafting a travel restriction request. The camera lens didn't blink, but Vanessa did. Irene sat across from her beneath the lights of the Channel 4 Evening Report studio, powder on her cheekbones, lapel mic taped just below her collarbone, and a bottle of water untouched on the end table. The chair was hard plastic made to look soft, the kind of furniture that never expected to hold a woman like her. "Take your time," Vanessa said gently, then turned back toward the camera. "We're rolling." The red light came on. "This is Vanessa Holt, and tonight we bring you an exclusive look at the Sacramento probate scandal now drawing state-level attention." The screen behind her lit up. "Exclusive. Widow declared dead. Locked in storage. Fights back." Irene watched her own face appear on the monitor. Older, sharper, alive in a way that didn't flatter but clarified. Then the photos. The cot. The sticky note. The metal shelf. Vanessa's voice lowered with practiced gravitas. "Mrs. Mallory, let's start with what happened to you." Irene nodded. "They called it downsizing. I was told it was temporary, but when I woke up in that unit, with no phone, no explanation, and a fake death certificate on file, it became clear this wasn't about family. It was about erasure." Vanessa blinked again, this time slower. "And the trust," she prompted. "They weaponized it." Irene said, folding her hands in her lap. "Turned every clause, every line of protection into a tool of silence. And they counted on the fact that no one would listen to a woman once they'd already written her obituary." The interview aired at 6:14 p.m. By 7 o'clock, the station's Facebook page had 1,200 comments. By 8 o'clock, Irene's inbox held more than 90 messages, some from strangers, others from former clients who remembered her from the courthouse days, women with similar stories, a retired teacher whose son accidentally froze her pension, a widower whose daughter-in-law had listed his cabin for sale while he was still in the hospital. They didn't want revenge, they wanted language. And now they had it. At 8:47 that night, Brian's employer, an upscale regional housing firm, issued a formal statement announcing his indefinite leave of absence, pending an internal investigation into financial misrepresentation in state advisory matters. Irene read the notice while stirring sugar into her tea. At 9:03, Kelly received a certified envelope at the boutique's temporary forwarding address. Inside, a cease and desist letter from the State Housing Board citing unauthorized use of escrowed inheritance funds for non-asset expenditure. The boutique's website went offline by morning. 3 days later, Molly appeared on a civic panel hosted by the local college Inheritance Ethics and the Next Generation. She wore a blazer 2 sizes too big and no makeup. She didn't read from notes. "My silence didn't make me neutral," she said. "It made me convenient. We've romanticized loyalty until it became a shield for cowardice. But silence isn't loyalty. It's just a shadow." A clip of that moment circulated fast, retweeted, clipped, reshared with the caption, "The granddaughter who broke the cycle." Irene watched it twice, not to fact-check, just to remember what clarity looked like in someone else's mouth. The story had legs now, not just pressure. Reporters had started calling Clay's office. A podcast requested Irene for a guest segment. One woman mailed her a signed copy of her memoir about survivorship, with a handwritten note, "Your story reminds me I wasn't crazy." Even Martin had called with an update. A small nonprofit out of Reno had quietly opened a case file on one of Brian's dummy corporations. "This storm's moving in your favor," he said. "Then I'll walk with the wind," Irene replied. At 11:11 p.m., Irene stood in the guest house doorway, eyes tracing the fence line, the moonlight pale on the gravel path. Her phone buzzed in her hand. Unknown number. No message, just a photo. She opened it, a picture of her wedding ring, set on a countertop beside a wine glass. Caption, "You forgot something." She didn't smile, she didn't flinch, but she didn't look away either. The air in the probate archives always smelled like something old had been filed and never forgiven. Irene walked in slowly, the fluorescent lights buzzing faintly overhead. The clerk behind the plexiglass didn't recognize her, which suited her just fine. She passed over her request slip. Irene Mallory, Addenda and Codicils, file hash M2090. The clerk furrowed his brow. This file was flagged for restricted access back in 2011. Contestation by an immediate heir. Irene raised an eyebrow. Flagged by who? The clerk tapped a few keys, then turned the monitor slightly. Flagged by Mallory, Brian Reese, contested relevance due to mental incompetence of surviving spouse. Irene let out a short breath, closer to a scoff than a sigh. I'd like to see it, she said. The document was brittle at the edges, typewritten but still sharp. The clerk slid it across the reading table in a protective, eyes cautious. Take your time. Irene opened the file like it might bite. It didn't. It simply waited to be understood. The codicil was signed 15 months before her husband's stroke. It referenced the original will, but included an addendum clause, buried near the end. In the event my immediate family turns, through coercion, negligence, or undue manipulation, against my wife, Irene Mallory, the estate shall dissolve into 2 designated trusts, one for low-income housing assistance in Sacramento County, and one for rural education grants in Colusa and Yolo counties. Beneath it, a signature. Then, in her husband's careful cursive, to my wife, who will know when to use this. Irene didn't blink. She didn't swallow. She just placed one hand over the page and closed her eyes. He had known. Not the details, not the mechanics, but the fault line. And the way Brian would someday jump up and down on it. Clay read it twice before speaking. They'll try to challenge it again, and they'll fail, Irene said. This time, I'm not dead, and I'm not quiet, Clay nodded. We can file a motion to reactivate the codicil, then freeze all account access until its conditions are fully reviewed. What does that do to Brian? Pins him to the wall. He's no longer an heir. He's a subject of review. Perfect, she said. The trust partners weren't just legal entities. They were people. Irene called each of them personally, one a director at a housing nonprofit, the other a superintendent overseeing rural grant programs. They remembered her husband. Both had written thank you letters in the early 2000s when the clauses were first proposed. This is real? The housing director asked. Very, Irene said, and it's about to become active. She had Clay forward the activation paperwork within the hour. The ripple hit Brian first. His bank's legal department flagged 3 of his accounts for compliance hold. Another pinged for pending asset redirection. He called the bank manager 4 times in one afternoon. None of the calls were returned. At 7:43 p.m., he texted Kelly, "Are we being erased?" She never answered. Back at the guest house, Genevieve tapped the screen of her iPad. Court calendars open for next Thursday. We'll make it a hearing, not a trial. Just enough to corner them under real lights. Irene nodded. Send the summons. Make it vague. Let them think they're coming to dispute something small. Trapdoor it? No, Irene said. I want them to walk in smiling. Genevieve grinned. Cruel. Clarifying. They shared a quiet look before Irene stood and walked to her desk. She opened the codicil again, traced the final sentence. To my wife, who will know when to use this. Her throat tightened, but not from sadness, from certainty. She folded the page, slid it into a fresh envelope, and placed it beside the courtroom documents Clay had dropped off earlier. The stack was growing. So was her audience, and just as she turned off the desk lamp, her phone buzzed. Another message. This one from Molly. I think they're going to try to flip the narrative. Kelly's meeting with a reporter. Irene stared at the screen. She smiled and whispered to the dark, let her. The post went live at exactly 8 a.m. A single photo. Irene standing on the courthouse steps, a pen in her hand, and the downtown skyline blurring behind her like something she'd already outlived. The caption read, "Come see what I signed." No hashtags, no tags, no filters, just the coordinates of the Superior Court of Sacramento and the quiet fire of a woman who no longer needed to hide. Genevieve was the first to share it. Then Molly. Then CareWatch 916. where the comments began stacking faster than the mods could review them. By 9:07 a.m., a local reporter had tweeted, "Breaking. Irene Mallory expected at courthouse today for live asset signing. Charitable transfer? Retaliation? Statement? All of the above?" Inside the courthouse, room 5B had been set up with 2 tables, a notary, a clerk, and a security officer who'd been briefed just enough to stay close, but not enough to understand the gravity. Irene walked in wearing navy wool and silver earrings. She didn't wave to the cameras. She didn't acknowledge the press. She simply sat, opened her folder, and laid out her life in line items. Roth 401k, transferred to the Sacramento Housing Rebalance Initiative. Antique Holdings, appraised and authenticated, transferred to the California Rural Youth Education Fund. Vacation Home in Truckee, dissolved from private ownership and placed in rotating nonprofit use per the trust stipulation. Each asset moved with one stroke of a pen, deliberate, unhurried. At 9:38, the live stream began. Genevieve handled the camera, framing Irene's hands as she signed, the documents as they were notarized, the clerk's confirming stamp thudding in rhythm. Vanessa Holt from Channel 4 stood silently at the back, scribbling notes. Then came the final document, authorization to close Irene's last personal account. It was modest compared to the others, but symbolically heavier. The clerk passed her the closing form. Irene paused only once. "This is the account they siphoned from," she said aloud. "The one they co-signed without consent. It was never theirs to touch." She signed her name and capped the pen. "Now it won't be." The stamp landed. At 9:51 a.m., the door slammed open. Brian, disheveled, no tie, face flushed with panic. "Irene," he barked. "You can't do this. You don't understand what you're—" Security moved quickly, stepping between him and the tables before his voice could echo a second time. "I need to speak to her," he growled. "She's not well. This is elder coercion. This is—" "You're done, Brian," Irene said quietly. "This is just the receipt." Security escorted him out before the cameras could swarm. Behind the glass doors, someone clapped once. Irene didn't turn to see who. By 10:10 a.m., her account closure was confirmed. All secondary access routes dissolved. No reactivation permitted without her biometric and notarial match. Kelly received her notice by email at 10:14. Subject: co-signed account under IRS audit. Immediate freeze. The boutique funds, the grief grant, the designer courier tabs, all flagged pending investigation into inheritance manipulation. She didn't reply. She just posted a black square to her boutique's now empty Instagram page and turned off her phone. Outside the courthouse, Vanessa approached cautiously. "Irene, may I ask, why now?" Irene adjusted her gloves. "Because they gambled on me staying quiet. I decided to raise the stakes." "Do you think you've won?" "This isn't a win. It's a correction." Vanessa paused, pen hovering. "What do you say to people who think this was too extreme?" Irene smiled, but there was no softness in it. "I think those people don't understand what it means to be erased piece by piece. I think they should be grateful I did it with a pen." She turned and walked toward the stone steps. Genevieve handed her the phone. "Live stream topped 20,000, she said. Irene nodded. "Good. Let them see." Just then, her phone vibrated. A blocked number. No text this time. Just a voicemail. She hit play. Brian's voice. "You're going to burn everything down out of spite? This was our family. You were supposed to protect it. This isn't justice. This is revenge." She listened to the silence after the message ended. And then, to no one in particular, Irene whispered, "No, this is the inheritance." The envelope had no return address, only a single initial in wax seal. Irene opened it at the kitchen table, steam rising from her untouched tea. Genevieve quietly slicing pears in the corner. Molly leaned against the window, eyes still swollen from the night before, scrolling through messages on her phone. Supporters, survivors, reporters, trolls. Irene didn't comment. She just peeled the seal with deliberate care and unfolded the document inside. A deed, yellowed but notarized. Parcel hash 41,672,03. Owner Irene Mallory. Location Emigrant Gap, Sierra Nevada foothills. Classification secondary trust holding. Non-liquid asset. Status active, uncontested, privately titled. Signed Richard Mallory, 1994. Below it, in her husband's ink-stiff scrawl, for when the noise outgrows the house. Irene didn't speak, but her fingers closed around the edge of the page like someone steadying themselves for good news. By afternoon, the three of them, Genevieve at the wheel, Molly riding shotgun, Irene in the back seat with a wool coat folded neatly over her lap, drove east on I-80 until the city faded into ridgeline and frost-shadowed trees. No music, just pine-scented silence and the low hum of tires on winter asphalt. It took over 2 hours to reach the gate. The road narrowed to gravel, then to packed dirt as they crested the final bend. The cottage revealed itself slowly. A modest one-story framed in stone and timber, roof moss-draped but intact. No security system, no welcome mat. Just a small covered porch, a shuttered front window and stillness. Molly stepped out first, boots crunching gravel. Her breath fogged in the cold, but her pace didn't falter until she reached the edge of the old oak tree. The swing still hung from its lowest branch. Red rope, faded wooden plank, still bolted, unmoved. She let out a broken, involuntary laugh, one of those sounds born of memory and mourning. "I forgot this was real," she said softly. Irene came up beside her, resting one hand lightly on Molly's shoulder. He wanted it untouched. Genevieve had already begun checking the perimeter. No signs of intrusion. Old water lines, but functional. Some minor roof rot on the back corner. But if you're asking whether this place has been found, no. Not even sniffed. Inside, the air was musty but dry. The furniture was minimal, preserved under drop cloths. A love seat, a pine desk, a rocking chair by the stone hearth. A box of matches still sat in the drawer. The fireplace was stacked with old birch logs like someone meant to return but never did. Irene walked to the porch with a weathered wooden sign tucked under her arm. She hammered it in with 3 deliberate strikes, right beside the path leading to the swing. The sign read, "Welcome, by invitation only." Then she returned to the kitchen and lit the stove. The kettle hadn't rusted. Neither had she. They spent the night in sleeping bags spread over couches and rugs, the fire crackling low while Molly read headlines aloud. Brian removed from company board by vote of internal counsel. Attorney General confirms escalation of Mallory case to criminal docket. Probate activist blog crosses 500K hits in 1 week. At 8:14 a.m., the courier arrived. A man in gloves handed over a white envelope and nodded without speaking. The seal bore the crest of the California Superior Court. Irene opened it slowly. Subject: final estate determination. Ruling: all prior authority revoked. Petitioner Irene Mallory restored as full trustee and executor. Clause: status deemed irrevocable under Section 15,108A signed. Honorable Marjorie Blackwell, presiding judge. She passed the letter to Genevieve. Neither of them spoke. Molly just whispered, "You got it back." "No," Irene said. "I never lost it. They just put it somewhere I had to walk to." Outside, wind stirred the pine needles. The air felt quieter. Irene poured 3 cups of tea and opened the porch door. That was when she saw it. A single envelope resting on the porch railing. No postage, no seal, just her name, handwritten in tight, all capital letters. She picked it up and opened it. Inside, a photograph. Brian at a private airstrip, loading a suitcase into a jet with no tail number. On the back, someone had written, "He's not done, just gone quiet." Irene stood perfectly still. Then she turned the photo over, lit a match from the hearth, and let it burn down to nothing in her hand. The photo didn't get thrown away, not entirely. Irene kept a copy printed on matte paper, clipped at the edge, no caption. She placed it on the mantel beside the rusted key from Unit 17C, both resting in a small shadow box lined with birch bark from the cottage's woods. Not as trophies, not even as warnings, just markers. Evidence that a woman could be buried and still surface with breath in her chest and pen in hand. The cottage had taken on new life. Twice a month, folding chairs circled the front room where the drop cloths used to be. A crackling fire, teacups with chipped handles, and women of all ages taking turns. A nurse who'd signed power of attorney over to her nephew during a hip replacement. A retired contractor whose daughter convinced him to co-sign a deed for a home he never stepped inside. A librarian who didn't realize her name was missing from the pension statements until the third year. They didn't call it therapy, they called it re-entry. Irene listened more than she spoke, but when she did speak, people leaned in. "You're not weak," she would say. "They're just betting you'll play polite until the paperwork sets." Molly handled logistics, cookies, chair setup, printing the resource packets Clay helped her assemble. And today she carried something extra into the room. A wrapped parcel tied with red twine and a label that read Gran in her handwriting. Irene opened it slowly. Inside was a book, soft cover, crisp spine, the title etched in a font that looked carved instead of typed. One signature, How They Tried to Erase Her. By M.L. Mallory. Irene flipped to the dedication. For the one who remembered everything and refused to stay quiet. Genevieve read the back aloud and wiped her eyes without comment. She stood and lifted her chipped mug of cider. "To the woman who wasn't erased," she said, "and to the ones who followed her back to the surface." Everyone clinked mismatched glasses. Irene raised hers slightly, then placed it back down. After the meeting, the three of them moved to the garden. The old overgrown hedges had been cleared, and Molly had painted the bench under the oak herself. Deep green with brushed white lettering. "In memory of who we were." Genevieve stood back and admired it. "Hope that swing never comes down." "It won't," Molly said. I reinforced the bolts. Sunlight cut through the pine canopy just right. Warm but not sentimental. Irene looked toward the hills, where fog had started to retreat into the valleys like shame giving way to clarity. The courier came just before dusk. The man was the same as before, gloved, brief, no wasted words. This time, the envelope was addressed not to Irene, but to Molly. She opened it carefully, her breath hitched. A letter from Pacific Law College. Full scholarship, focus, elder justice law. Named endowment, the Irene M. Mallory Advocacy Grant. She looked up, stunned, tears welling fast. They're offering me a spot," Genevieve grinned. "They'd be fools not to." Irene stepped forward, her voice low but certain. "Make it loud, Molly. Make it legal." Molly threw her arms around her before she could finish the sentence. That night, they sat together on the porch as the stars lifted into position. Genevieve humming an old song Irene half recognized. Molly sketching out her blog's next piece in a spiral notebook. Irene rocked slowly in the old chair by the door, hands folded in her lap, shawl pulled tight around her shoulders. The porch light hummed above her. The forest stretched out ahead like a promise finally kept. And then, to no one in particular, maybe to the wind, maybe to herself, she said, "They downsized me, and I upscaled their lesson."